Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Great to have you here to learn more about the Charter Revision Commission and the 5 questions that have been put to New York City voters this November. To kick us off, we'll have some short remarks from one of the members of the Charter Revision Commission, Anita Lermont.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Anita Lermont, and I'm a member of the Charter Revision Commission. As many of you likely know, this election, after you vote for the mayor and other local offices, there are 5 proposed charter amendments on your ballot, 4 on housing and land use, and 1 on even year elections. These proposals were informed by 7 months of public input and careful study. At 10 hearings across the 5 boroughs, we heard from thousands of New Yorkers from all walks of life and every corner of the city. I want to express my thanks to the more than 800 New Yorkers who came out to testify before our commission and the thousands more who submitted written comments. You reflect the boundless passion that New Yorkers have for building a more affordable and responsive city. When we had the honor of joining this commission, we were charged with tackling our city's deep housing crisis. No one can deny that the status quo is not working. Every New Yorker knows that the rent is indeed simply too high. The housing crisis determines who we are as a city. How can we ensure that New York City remains a cradle of opportunity for people of all backgrounds, as it was in the 20th century? We have worked exhaustively to find solutions that meet this moment, and I'm very proud to say that we have a set of proposals before us today that can set us on a path toward a more equitable, affordable city. The 4 housing proposals before us today would speed up the type of housing that New Yorkers say they want the most, but which suffer the most under the status quo, and that's affordable housing and small projects. These changes will help our city address the most pressing citywide needs, like our housing and climate crises, while maintaining local voice in land use decisions. New York's existing land use process, or ULURP, will continue to be the primary vehicle for land use changes in New York City. But we've learned from 50 years of ULURP and have identified ways to fix the process where it isn't working. Tackling the issue of New York's chronically low voter turnout by proposing switching New York City elections from odd to even years. Increasing voter turnout gets at the root of so many of our other challenges as a city, and I'm very grateful to the passionate New Yorkers who put this issue on our commission's agenda. Throughout this process, we've striven to fulfill our responsibility as an independent commission, considering ideas on their merits, regardless of who proposed them and regardless of who supports them. I'm very confident that this set of proposals lives up to that charge. I also want to emphasize that ultimately, these changes will be up to you, the voters. Nothing would change unless approved by a majority of voters. So thank you very much for joining us. With Election Day on November 4th and early voting already occurring, it's critical that all of us make our voices heard about the future of our city. So with that, I'm very happy to pass the mic to Alec, who will walk you through the proposals in more detail. Alec.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening to learn more about what's on your ballot. So let's get right into it. This November, this election, many of you are already voting because early voting has already begun. You will, on the back of your ballot, after you flip your ballot, find 6 questions. The first question actually has nothing to do with New York City. It's a state constitutional amendment that has to do with an Olympic facility in the Adirondacks. And we're not going to be talking much about that today. But if you're interested in learning more, you can go to the League of Women Voters that has a voter guide and some explanation on that topic. But after that, there are 5 other questions on your ballot that relate to the city charter, which is really, as Anita mentioned, the city's constitution. And 4 of those questions relate to housing and land use. And 1 relates to when New York City holds local elections. So this presentation is to get into those details. Now, this commission was formed last December. And over the next 8 months, it held public hearings across the 5 boroughs to hear from New Yorkers about what was important to them and how they thought the city charter could be changed. We held 2 hearings in each borough, and we had really phenomenal turnout. We heard over 30 hours of live testimony from New Yorkers and housing experts and national experts on housing and elections. 800 folks showed up to our meetings, and we received over 3,000 written comments, some of which were remarkably detailed and thoughtful and suggested particular changes to the city charter on most any topic you can think of. We were lucky in this work to have a great group of New Yorkers as our commissioners, folks who understand city government very well. Our chair was Richard Beery, who is the CEO of the anti-poverty organization Robin Hood. He was also the former deputy mayor under de Blasio, who helped launch Pre-K for All. Our vice chair is Sharon Greenberger, the head of the YMCA of New York. We've had the head of the United Way, Grace Bonilla, Shams DeBaron, the homelessness advocate, and former chairs of city planning, and people who've been in and around government and understand it well, but also importantly, understand when it's not working well. What we heard more than anything else from New Yorkers, you won't be surprised, is that housing costs are too high, that New Yorkers are suffering under a housing crisis where prices seem always to go up and never to go down. And what we heard from New Yorkers and from experts on housing is that the reason housing costs keep going up is that New York City is not building enough housing to meet New Yorkers' needs. New York builds much less housing than we used to when we were more affordable as a city. In the 1920s, New York City built 729,000 units of housing. That's more housing in just one decade than we built from 1970 to 2020 for 50 years. We're producing less housing than other parts of the country that are doing a much better job of staying affordable. And there's a lot of recent research, including from Pew Charitable Trust, that shows that the cities that are doing the best job of holding housing costs down are the ones that are growing. And if you want to know why we're not building as much housing as we used to or we could, there's a simple reason. It is illegal to build more housing in much of the city. Now, it's not just that we aren't building enough housing. It's that some neighborhoods are seeing transformative levels of growth while other neighborhoods are not growing much at all. From 2014 to 2024, just 12 of the city's 59 community boards built as much housing as the other 47 combined. Some neighborhoods aren't just not growing, they're actually losing housing as affluent New Yorkers combine existing apartments into larger homes faster than new housing units are even built. And the fact that just some communities are building housing puts tremendous pressure on those communities to address what is really a citywide and regional housing crisis, and exacerbating the kind of pressures that those communities are feeling. Now, our housing crisis has many dimensions. It's not just that the rent keeps going up. It's not just that so many New Yorkers are being priced out of our city. It's not just that so many New Yorkers are crowding into homes that are too small to be comfortable. It's also about where we live. And, you know, we don't like to talk about it too much as a progressive city, but by some measures, New York's metropolitan area is more segregated than Birmingham, Alabama, and St. Louis by race and ethnicity. The housing crisis also affects our ability to stay a dynamic and culturally vibrant city, as the creators and artists, the people who work on Broadway, find it harder and harder to stay in the city. And if they can't stay here, then so much of the vitality that makes New York exciting will go with them. Our housing crisis also affects New York's heft and presence on the national stage. At the next congressional redistricting, by some measures, New York State is slated to lose 2 more congressional seats, as New York is growing more slowly than other parts of the country. And given the importance of Washington policy on New York, it is a little horrifying to think that New York will lose even more of a say in what is happening in Washington. Now, the charter isn't everything. When we think about the housing crisis, it has many dimensions, and not all of them are affected by or addressable through the charter. Rent stabilization is a critical support for 2 million New Yorkers. But rent stabilization is a creature of state law. It's not in the charter. Property taxes are extremely important, and they shape what we build and where we build it and why. But those are also a creature of state law and not influenceable through the charter. Budget support at the federal, state level, that is not influenceable through the charter. But what the charter does control is the land use decision-making process, how we decide whether to allow more housing to be built in a location than is currently allowed. It sets out the who's in the room and how long that process takes. And so when we're thinking about how to address the housing crisis through the charter, it was natural to think about that process, which is what we've done. Now, most of you will be familiar with the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or ULURP. ULURP was created 50 years ago this November. And what we heard from New Yorkers and experts is that ULURP is actually doing a pretty good job at most things in most places. It does a good job of synthesizing community board feedback and borough president feedback and the views of experts and the views of democratically accountable elected officials. But we also heard that 50 years of experience with ULURP have revealed that it has certain flaws. And the commission's proposals seek to target those things that experience has revealed to not be working while leaving in place the rest of the system. Now, what we heard in particular is that the process we have is failing in three critical respects. The first is that affordable housing faces particular challenges that private market rate construction does not. So even when the city itself wants to build 100% affordable housing on city-owned land to achieve the kind of deep affordability that only the government can deliver with government funds, we forced that project to go through years and years of duplicative review, slowing it down, meaning we're spending more money on process and less money on housing. The second thing we heard is that ULURP is categorically broken for smaller projects, meaning it's only delivering big changes and not modest ones. And the third thing we heard is that ULURP simply isn't working in some parts of the city that aren't growing or adding any affordable housing at all. And when I say that, I mean it. Today, the top 10 council districts are producing about 750 affordable housing units a year. But the bottom 10 are producing 3. That's just 3. Now, why would it be that in a city that has surging demand to live here, there would be so little housing produced in some parts of the city and so much in some others? Well, if you look at this map in the center here, it shows you where there are approved projects today to add housing. And if you're hashed out on this map, that means that in the last 10 years, there hasn't been a single approved project from a private applicant to add any housing. That means that if you're hashed out here in the last 10 years, there hasn't even been a single project that's gone through ULURP to add housing. And if you're in light blue, there's just been 1 or 2 in the last 10 years. If you look at the darker shaded parts of the map, those are the parts of the city that we saw are growing and adding housing. And so it's no surprise that that's where we're seeing applications brought and granted. Why would it be that some parts of the city aren't seeing any projects granted at all? Well, we asked the people who build affordable housing, like Kurt Goodridge here at Monadnock Development. And what he told us is a very important factor is the city council practice known as member deference. And member deference isn't in the charter, it's a custom. And what it means basically is that the city council will defer to the views of the local council member on any land use projects, in particular housing projects. And if a council member represents a part of the city where it's too politically toxic to say yes to affordable housing, the council members invariably say no. And what Kirk described is that as a builder of affordable housing, if you're looking at a potential site for affordable housing, the first thing you do as a result is you look up who the council member is. And if there's someone who represents a part of the city where it's going to be too politically toxic to say yes, you don't ever look at it again. You don't even start the process because you know your project is dead on arrival. And that reinforces the inequity we're seeing in the housing production picture, where only some parts of the city are growing at all. Now, we're not the first people to put our finger on member deference as a problem. Jumaane Williams in 2017, when he was running for Speaker of the City Council, talked about the way that in a deeply segregated city, member deference has perpetuated segregation. And, he recently commented that that might be one reason why he was not elected Speaker in 2017. Queensborough President Donovan Richards has talked about the way this creates fiefdoms of control, even though we have citywide challenges to address. And the Biden Department of Housing and Urban Development, after performing an investigation of Chicago and its very, very similar practice called aldermanic privilege, because they have aldermen, not council members, said that their local practice disproportionately harmed Black and brown Chicagoans, and that it perpetuated segregation, and that it effectuated opposition to affordable housing based on racial animus. And, examining these challenges here in New York, it's difficult to see how to distinguish our own system. So the Charter Revision Commission's proposals that are on your ballot this fall try to target these many challenges. They attempt to create faster, simpler, and less political processes to deliver targeted categories of housing, namely affordable housing and modest projects. ULURP remains the same for most actions in most places. Everything still needs public review, so nothing becomes automatically legal to build. These proposals only relate to the process through which you ask for changes. Everything that has community board review today will have it tomorrow, and we don't shorten community board review by a single day. An environmental review, historic district and landmark protections, labor protections, construction and safety standards, all these things stay the same. Okay, let's get into the details of the questions themselves. Question 2 on your ballot. Remember, there's that question about an Adirondack ski facility is number 1. Question 2 on your ballot is the first one related to the city charter, and it creates fast tracks for affordable housing. This is a response to the challenge that we need more affordable housing, and we need more of it in more of the city. And we also need to spend less money on process and more money on housing itself. The first proposal is a fast track for publicly financed affordable housing. This is when the government itself is building affordable housing with public funds. Now, to be eligible for this action, you're going to need zoning relief to deliver your affordable housing project. You have to demonstrate that your project fits neighborhood character, that it fits in with the look and feel of a neighborhood. You have to be a publicly financed project, meaning that the city or another government actor is putting up the funds to pay for this project, typically 100% affordable. And the fourth is that you have to be a housing development fund company, which is a state-regulated entity that is created exclusively for the purpose of creating low-income housing. But if you are those 4 things, then you don't have to go through the typical ULURP process that we outlined before. Instead, you can go through a fast-track process where the community board gets 60 days, and then the Board of Standards and Appeals gets 30 days, and then that's typically done, 90 days, cutting in more than half the timeline for public review. Now, what's the Board of Standards and Appeals? The Board of Standards and Appeals is an independent body that today grants many zoning waivers. It is 5 people who are appointed to fixed 6-year terms and serve independently. The appointees are made by the mayor, and each of them is approved with the advice and consent of the city council. So if the city council doesn't want to approve a member, they won't be seated on the commission. And all in, we think that this process, by creating a fast track for affordable, could actually allow projects to get approved faster than today they can even enter and start the ULURP process. The second component of the question 2 is a fast track for projects that deliver affordable housing in the parts of the city that today are producing the least amount of affordable housing. In 2023, the City Council unanimously passed something called the Fair Housing Framework. And it's a great idea. It basically says that every part of the city should be contributing to our housing need, and that every community district should have a target for affordable housing production. But the City Council was just passing this framework through local law. They couldn't amend the charter, which requires a referendum like this one. And so currently there's no enforcement mechanism for the City Council's Fair Housing Framework, meaning if a part of the city doesn't actually add affordable housing because the political process isn't working there, then nothing happens. So the Commission's proposal is to add an enforcement mechanism for the Fair Housing Framework. Every 5 years, at the same time as the Fair Housing Framework, the city will do an assessment of all 59 community boards in the city. And then the bottom 1/5, the bottom 12 community districts that are producing the lowest amount of affordable housing will be subject to a fast track. And if you're in that bottom 12, the only projects that get fast tracked are the projects that are required to deliver affordable housing, under the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program. In other words, everything that's on this fast track will be required to deliver permanently affordable housing. Now, the fast track works like this. The community board and borough president continue to weigh in. Remember, we're not shortening community board review time by a day for 60 days, followed by 30 days for the city planning commission. And then that's it. That's the end of the story. The city planning commission would have the final word, unlike the typical ULURP process. And here you can compare these two processes and how much faster the fast track would go. Now, if you're not familiar with the City Planning Commission, let me describe what it is. It's 13 members. 7 of the members are appointed by the mayor. 5 are appointed by each borough president, and 1 is appointed by the public advocate. And 12 of those 13 people on the City Planning Commission, they're approved by the City Council, which creates a healthy check and a balance for the City Planning Commission, which remains an independent commission whose members can only be removed for cause. That is, if they do something wrong, not if you just disagree with their decisions. Okay, so you may have received some misinformation about these proposals. You may have gotten something in the mail that inaccurately describes these proposals. Some folks are inaccurately saying that these fast tracks give unilateral approval authority to the mayor, but that's not true, as I just described to you. Both of these fast tracks give final decision-making power to independent bodies. The Board of Standards and Appeals, just 5 members appointed by the mayor, all of whom are approved with and only with the advice and consent of the City Council. And then they serve for independent 6-year terms. The City Planning Commission, 13 members, 12 of those 13 approved with the advice and consent of the City Council, meaning if the City Council doesn't like those people, they don't serve on that independent commission. You may have also received misinformation about what gets fast-tracked under these proposals. So let's review that one more time. You may have heard these fast tracks don't deliver affordable housing, but they do. Every project on the fast track will be required to deliver affordable housing. If you're in the bottom 12 community districts, only projects that deliver permanently affordable apartments under the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program are eligible for the fast track. That means that it will anything that's fast tracked will have to meet the standards in the city's new MIH program. And if the City Council and the mayor in the future want to change that program by requiring more affordability or deeper affordability, the fast track will work for that too. And if you're on the publicly financed affordable housing fast track, the only things that are eligible are publicly financed affordable housing. That's typically 100% affordable housing with the deepest affordability and homeless set-asides. And that's how we achieve supportive housing and senior housing and the kind of deeply affordable housing that the private sector will never deliver on its own. And if you're not one of these two things, you can't get fast-tracked. Question 3. This is a different question on your ballot. The next one. This is about creating a simplified review procedure for modest housing and infrastructure projects. Now, today, ULURP is one size fits all. It applies the same process to huge projects like Hudson Yards as someone who wants to do something really small, like creating a 3-story apartment building with 6 units. As a result, people don't even go through the process for small changes because the length and cost and risk of that process means it's not worth it to ask for something small. And the commission's perspective is that there's something a little perverse about a public review procedure that delivers only the kind of big changes that communities find it pretty hard to grapple with, while categorically preventing the kind of incremental and organic and modest changes that communities most want to see. So this proposal creates an expedited review procedure for specific categories of modest projects, dispositions and acquisitions for affordable housing, certain infrastructure and resiliency projects, and certain city map changes. Now, the modest housing projects are all specifically defined. So when you see that word modest, you're thinking, what does that mean? The charter proposals lay it out in great detail. If you were in one of these yellow parts of the map here, in a medium or high density area, and someone wants to ask for the right to build 30% or less more housing than they're allowed to build today, they can go through this fast track. That means that if today you're only allowed to build, say, 10 stories, then you can ask for permission to build 13. You're not guaranteed to get a yes, but it creates a fast track to ask for that kind of modest change. Now, why did we draw the line at 30% or less? It's because we looked at everything that's gone through the public review process in the last 10 years and found that, if you believe it, there was nothing, not one project that asked for a bump of 30% or less, meaning this is a kind of incremental and organic change that just doesn't exist in ULURP today. And the really nice thing here is that in addition to granting bonuses that we can't get today through the process, virtually every change in a medium or high density area will allow us to require permanently affordable housing under the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program. Second, if you're in these blue areas of the map, the low density parts of the city, and you want the right to build something that's has a standard height of no taller than 45 feet, think of a 3 or 4 story home, then you can also go through this fast track. This is a way of trying to unlock really modest multifamily development, 2, 3, 4, 5 units in a 45-foot tall building, because those kind of things are naturally lower cost. They are especially conducive to home ownership, and they fit really nicely with the look and feel of our outer borough neighborhoods. This process is also a way to try to fast track critical climate and infrastructure investments, because if there's a challenge as critical as the housing crisis to New York City, it is certainly our climate crisis. Today, our charter was designed before we really understood the gravity of the climate crisis and how quick we need to make adaptive changes to respond to it. Let me give you an example. Today, many communities across the city are suffering from flooding. But if the city wants to raise the grade of a public street to try to prevent neighbors from suffering from flooding, it actually has to go through the full public review process of ULURP just to do that. Today, if the city wants to make a modest resiliency project like shoring up a waterfront or building open space or allowing for solar panels on public land, it often has to go through the full ULURP process. And today, if a homeowner is suffering from flooding, maybe they're in a part of the city where, because of climate change, we just don't think people should be living anymore, and they want to sell their property to the city, we have to go through a full ULURP process, which certainly doesn't work for homeowners in harm's way. And so this proposal would also allow those discrete climate and infrastructure projects to go through this abbreviated process. So reviewing here for a moment, we have those modest housing projects. We have those resiliency investments I just talked about. We also have dispositions, acquisitions, and city map changes to support affordable housing, although most of those will still go through the city council under state law. And finally, because we said modest in this proposal, we wanted to reinforce that we really meant this proposal is only for modest changes. So if you are the kind of project that today might have significant adverse impacts on the environment as revealed by an environmental review, then you are just categorically ineligible for this question. And so this is really only for stuff that under environmental review, there are no potentially significant adverse effects. And here is what the ELERP process looks like. As compared to the existing ELERP process, public review is cut in more than half. But community board period, that stays the same, as does the borough president's opportunity to weigh in. And a final decision is made in most cases by the City Planning Commission, which is again, that 13-member independent body with 12 of those 13 members approved with the advice and consent of the City Council. And if it's a disposition of city land or something else that under state law has to go to the City Council, then there's the City Council will replace the City Planning Commission at the end. So we still get faster, and it's the City Council at the end. Okay, question 4 on your ballot next is in some ways the most direct response to the problem of having a hyper-local veto on any affordable housing project, as we discussed in the past. So today, the way the process works is the City Council is at the end of ELERP, and under its custom, it defers to that local member. So if a local member is a part of town where it's too politically toxic to say yes to affordable housing, then no affordable housing gets built. Then after the City Council goes, there's a hypothetical mayoral veto, then a hypothetical override of the mayoral veto, which rarely happens because in practice, the views of the local member are almost always decisive. This proposal would abolish the mayoral veto, and it would abolish the City Council override of that veto. And in its place, if the City Council rejects an affordable housing project, or it cuts down an affordable housing project, then there would be a new body called the Affordable Housing Appeals Board, which is an opportunity to give an affordable housing project another chance at success, another lease on life. If the council kills a project that's affordable housing or cuts it down, the appeals board will be able to restore it or bring it back up to where it started. But if and only if 2 out of 3 of the members of the appeals board agree, and the appeals board has 3 people on it, the local borough president, the City Council speaker, and the mayor. And it's those democratically accountable elected officials which would have the ability to restore an affordable housing project. Now, I just outlined all of this on the screen, but here are our lovely borough presidents who will be playing an important role in this new appeals board. And here is a comparison of how the existing process works as compared to the appeals board. Now, remember, this is only for projects that directly facilitate the creation of affordable housing. So if you're a casino or a hotel or a hospital, you're going to go through the old process that we know. But if you're an affordable housing an affordable housing project, then everything stays the same from community board all the way through City Council. But if a project is rejected or cut down, then the Affordable Housing Appeals Board would have the ability to bring it back to life. Question 5 on your ballot has to do with something very wonky but important, the city map. The city map is the official record of the city's streets and parks and the layout of the city. And a lot of projects, not just housing projects, but all kinds of projects, require changes to the city map or require investigation of what's on the city map. But today, that city map process is mired in very outdated practices. It is actually not one city map. It is actually 8,000 pieces of paper maps, all of which are managed across 5 different borough offices. This system is generously stuck in the 20th century, and what we heard from former workers at these borough offices and from the development community, the people who work in city government, trying to get things done, that this process needs to be brought into the 21st century. So what this proposal would do is replace that fragmented paper map process with a single digital map system managed by the Department of City Planning. And if you're wondering, this sounds like a fine idea, but why do I have to vote on something so common sense? The answer is because our charter currently locks us in to this 5-office system. And so it takes a charter amendment to fix it. And finally, although the people on this call are very interested in city government, we can say that there isn't always great turnout in local elections. This issue, which was certainly not on the commission's radar when we started, was brought to our attention by advocates for democracy and local government reform, like the Brennan Center and Citizens Union and the League of Women Voters, who said, you know, there are ways that other cities have dramatically increased turnout in local elections in a way that's beneficial. And what they suggested is that we try to realign when New York City holds local elections. Today, we hold local elections like this year in odd years, the year after the federal presidential election. But they pointed out that in federal presidential years, as you can see on this map, there's actually much, much higher turnout in New York City. Turnout in federal presidential years can be 2.5 or 3 times higher than in local elections. So if we align local elections with federal presidential years, these groups explained, we can dramatically increase turnout very quickly and easily. They also explained that the voting population in a federal presidential year looks a lot more like New York, is a lot more representative of New York. Hispanic turnout in federal presidential years is 5 times higher. Black and Asian turnout is 3 times higher. So if we don't just want more New Yorkers to participate, but we want the people who are participating to really represent New York in its full diversity, they recommended this change to federal presidential years. Now, it would also save a little money for the city, approximately $42 million every 2 years, according to the Independent Budget Office. But one thing I must flag for you, even if New Yorkers agree that this is a great change and that we should move local elections to federal presidential years this November, there will still need to be another state constitutional amendment to effectuate this change. So not only do we need a local charter change, we also need a state constitutional change to allow New York City to align its elections with federal presidential years. But this proposal would put New York City in the position to take advantage of a potential state constitutional amendment as soon as state law changes. So that's it. That's what's on your ballot. 5 questions to amend the city charter, 4 of which relate to housing and land use, and 1 that relates to local democracy. And Casey, I'd be happy to answer any questions from those who've attended this evening.
Thank you so much, Alec. And thank you all for tuning in this evening. We've seen some folks join midway through. So just to answer the first question that's come up a couple times in the Zoom chat, yes, the recording will be made available, as will the slides. You can visit nyc.gov/charter to see that. Also, feel free to email us at charterinfo@citycharter.nyc.gov for that information. Our team would be happy to send it your way. Secondly, to get into the sort of the how of asking questions, if you're listening now on Zoom, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a little speech bubble with a question mark in it, and we'll take those as they come in. Some of you also submitted questions when you registered, so thank you for that, and we'll get to those in just a moment. So with that out of the way, let's start with one that someone submitted when they registered, pretty straightforward, which is why were these revisions proposed?
Well, thank you, Casey. Well, these revisions were proposed because we held public hearings across the 5 boroughs to hear from New Yorkers and experts in housing and elections and really city government writ large. And these proposals were first shaped by the testimony we heard. Advocates for affordable housing and experts in affordable housing told us about the problems that they're encountering in trying to deliver affordable housing across the city. And each of these reforms is really rooted in specific testimony that the Charter Revision Commission heard. In fact, if you go and read our final report, which is a lengthy document, it's 135 pages, so it's nighttime reading, maybe it'll put you to sleep, you'll see that each of the proposals was driven by specific suggestions by affordable housing advocates and other experts. And in the case of local elections, the reform was proposed by the League of Women Voters and Citizens Union and other groups that are committed to trying to improve local democracy.
Thanks, Alec. Moving to another one that has been a hot topic in public conversations the last few weeks. Why take power away from the community board and the council? And I presume here the question asker is talking about the city council.
Sure. Okay. So first of all, nothing about a community board's role changes in any of these proposals. So I just want to make that clear again. Anywhere where a community board has a say today, it continues to have a say. And we do not shorten a community board's opportunity to weigh in by a day anywhere. And so that's all over these proposals. And so there has been some misinformation on that front. The second is that with respect to the city council, it's true that some responsibilities are moving from the city council to other actors in limited categories. And I tried to walk through why that was so for each one, but I'll just give you an example. So we talked about how today we're not building enough affordable housing, but we are particularly not building enough affordable housing in some parts of the city that are not adding any affordable housing at all. And when I say that, I mean it. Like virtually no affordable housing. A single project would be more than some communities have approved in the last 10 years. And so what that shows you is that the political process we have today, where the local council member has an unqualified veto over whether housing is approved in a part of the city, has prevented whole parts of the city from contributing to our affordable housing need because the politics in that place are too politically toxic. And so, question 2 creates a fast track for affordable housing in the 12 of the 59 community districts in the city that are producing the least amount of affordable housing. That's a way to try to get around the political obstacles that are today preventing the delivery of affordable housing in that community. And I have to tell you that every community in this city needs affordable housing. There is not one community in this city where housing's affordable, everybody's doing fine and consuming the amount of housing they need for their family. Every community sees high rates of being cost burdened, high rates of overcrowding, and dissatisfaction with housing costs. So we think every community needs to be adding more affordable housing.
Thanks, Alec. Speaking of affordable housing, we got 2 questions that are both about Proposal 2. So I will just read them both off one by one, and then we can take each half in time. First is, why was the question made to include both parts of Proposal 2 in one proposal, not split them, and how are they related? And then secondly, to the second part of it, what are the 12 community boards with the least amount of affordable housing allowed in the past?
Sure. So let me actually start with, sorry, let me just write both down.
I'm happy to repeat it as well.
Yeah, so because there's a lot to that question. Okay, so first, what are the 12? The answer is we don't know. Actually, who's in the bottom 12 won't be determined for some time because it's going to look at 5 years of data about the rate of affordable housing production. And that includes stuff that's happening right now, and it includes stuff that's happening in the future. And so the first assessment, if question 2 passes, will be performed in October 1 of 2026. And so projects that are just getting started now and projects that'll be getting started next year will count toward whether a community is in the bottom 12 or not. And so, you can look historically at the communities that are doing the least amount of affordable housing production, and the Furman Center has done an analysis of that, and the New York Housing Conference has done an analysis of that, and you can look at those communities. But the answer is that the bottom 12 haven't been determined, and no one knows what exactly will fall into the bottom 12 because no one has a crystal ball. And the second is, why were these 2 elements of question 2 combined together? Because remember, question 2 has 2 parts: a fast track for publicly financed affordable housing, and a fast track for projects that deliver affordable housing in the 12 community boards that deliver the least? The answer is there is a lot of factors that go into these questions. The commission had to contend with a few different pieces. One is that state law limits how long each of the questions can be to just 75 words. That's 15 words for a title and 30 words for a description, and then 30 words for a rephrasing of the question in a yes or no format, which meant we didn't have a lot of space. But at the same time, we didn't want to overburden New Yorkers with too many questions, because the longer ballots get, the harder it is for New Yorkers to contend with what's on the ballot. And historically, you see more drop off the longer a ballot gets. That is, people stop completing the questions. And so we wanted to keep to what has been a historically healthy number of 5 Charter Revision Commission proposals. And so to try to accurately describe each of the proposals and bunch them together where appropriate, and especially where they're trying to get at some of the same goals, that's what led the various questions to be formed the way they were. And so what I will say is this, more than anything else, is question 2 is getting at a core issue, that we need more affordable housing across the city, and we need more of it in particular in the parts of the city that today are producing very little. And so there's a natural sync there.
I'm going to go a little out of order here just because it's extremely relevant also to those bottom 12. New question that just came in on Zoom, and again, thank you all for using the Zoom Q&A function along the bottom of the screen, is what was the rationale for selecting the number 12 for the districts that would be in the affordable housing fast track in relation to the broader city?
Yeah, so the bottom 12, it could have been another number. There's nothing magic in 12, but if you're wanting to know why did the commission pick 12, it's that the commission thought we want to get at the outlier parts of the city where the political system today is really broken, while leaving most of the ordinary process for most places undisturbed. And so 12 was a way of saying this isn't your average district. It's certainly not the districts that are doing a great job today. It's only those that are today producing virtually no affordable housing. If you also look at our final report, you'll see if you're in the bottom 12, that means you are producing virtually nothing today. So we're not capturing the districts where some things are getting approved, some things aren't, and that's healthy. We're capturing the parts of the city where basically nothing can even be proposed because nothing can ever get approved.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is a little broader. It's submitted from someone who registered, and it's just asking, will any of these proposals benefit homeowners?
Yes. So a lot of these fast tracks also will create new homeownership opportunities. So if you're on the fast track and you're going to be mapped mandatory inclusionary housing, you can also deliver that with affordable homeownership opportunities, which are very important to New Yorkers, because many want to own and have the stability that comes with homeownership, but we're certainly not seeing affordable homeownership opportunities created at scale today in New York. Also, question 3, by making it easier to build those modest projects that are, no taller than 45 feet, really allow for opportunities to create the kind of low-scale multifamily that's especially conducive to more affordable homeownership opportunities and the kind of bigger units that are conducive to homeownership. And so we're excited about the ways that these proposals could potentially allow more New Yorkers to become homeowners.
Great, thanks. 2 slightly process-oriented questions for the commission. One is, please explain why the Mayor's Charter Revision Commission recommendations are appearing on the November ballot and not the Commission to Strengthen Local Democracies. And then secondly, I was under the impression that the Charter Revision Commission was temporary. These ballot proposals go through, would the commission be dissolved, or will it stay on to oversee the process? Okay,
I'm going to take that in the reverse order. So this Charter Revision Commission, which was created by Mayor Adams, and I went through the people who served on it, like our chair, Richard Beery. On election night, we go poof. Whatever happens, yes or no, the Charter Revision Commission it ends on election night, and that's the way state law is structured. And so the implementation of these changes ends up going to the agencies and elected officials that are charged with the responsibilities under the charter. This is how every charter revision commission works. So this isn't unusual. But so there are certain new powers that are going to an affordable housing appeals board. It'll be up to those elected officials to take charge and to implement. Okay. Now, why are these charter revision commission proposals on the ballot? Under state law, when there's a charter revision commission like this one that places questions on the ballot, it takes precedent. Now, there's another sister charter revision commission created by the city council. They did not vote to place questions on the ballot this November, but if they had voted to place questions on the ballot, their questions would have been bumped to next year. So they'd still go on the ballot, but they would go on the ballot next year rather than this year. And that's how state law functions. It tries to envision an orderly process where there's only one set of questions there rather than a confusion of too many questions all being on at the same time. And there's actually a bill in Albany to change that's going to be considered by the governor later this year to change how the way charter revision commissions work. But that's how it works right now.
Great, thank you. So speaking of, one more on housing. For the appeals board, and for folks, this is question 4, the Affordable Housing Appeals Board, will it hold public meetings or public hearings?
Yeah, so remember, this appeals board happens at the end of the ULURP process we already know. So there will have been a public hearing at the community board. There will have been a public hearing with the borough president. There will have been a public hearing with the city planning commission. And there will have been a public hearing at the city council. And the appeals board will hold a public meeting, not a public hearing. So we thought 4 public hearings was enough. We wanted this to be a public meeting, transparent, out open in the light, with 3 democratically accountable elected officials, but we didn't think we needed a 5th public hearing because we didn't want to add more time and delay to the process. As we've been talking about before, we want to try to make the process faster and simpler and less political. And so we thought a public meeting and not a 5th public hearing was the right way to go.
Thanks, Al. So moving to question 6, the even year elections proposal. Got 2 questions. We'll take the simpler one first and then the second. First, how long would the process take to move elections to even years from today to implementation? And then the second is a bit longer, but it's about the phrasing of the question. It says, asking if local elections should be held the same year as presidential elections is misleading. What you're actually saying is that a local election should be held on the same day as a presidential election. And then some opinion from the question asker. In their opinion, that doesn't help voters pay attention to local candidates. They can just vote straight party lines instead.
Okay, so on the implementation question, it depends on when that state constitutional amendment goes into effect, right? We were talking about this. So even if we change our rules, that's necessary, but not enough. We also need the state constitutional amendment to go into effect in order to change. So when this can actually go into effect will depend on if and when that state constitutional amendment happens. But the earliest that it could realistically happen is likely 2032. That is likely the first year where there would be a presidential election that was also coinciding with a mayoral election. Now, to the other question, I'm not sure how this question would be misleading. And this question is phrased like very many even year election proposals across the country because many referendums have been adopted making this same change. We borrowed that language very closely from other court-approved proposals. But at bottom, I think what you're getting at is your concern that if a local election is held at the same time as a federal presidential election, that those federal issues will distract people from local issues, right? And I understand that concern, and let me tell you why the commission ultimately thought this was still a really good idea. The first is that, again, we have very low turnout in local elections today. So we don't have as many voices as we should deciding really important local races. And so having 2.5 or 3 times more voters in the process means we're getting more democracy and more voices at the table. Second, as I said, the federal presidential electorate looks a lot more like New York. So it's not just that we have more New Yorkers, it's that we have a more representative group of New Yorkers. The third is that, okay, we're in an odd year. It's 2025. There's no federal presidential election on the ballot. But I think anyone would be hard pressed to argue that we've had an election that is not also involving questions of federal government and federal issues and even international issues, right? And there's certainly been a lot of questions about how Washington affects us right now. And you could say that's a distraction, but it's also a reflection of the fact that what happens in Washington really affects New York and vice versa. And so it's healthy for people to be thinking about the connections between these two things. And even if you want just a conversation about how the trash should be picked up or the schools are run, I don't think any of us can realistically say that's what we're getting right now. And finally, I'll say this. I think that although the people on a Zoom like this are very, very engaged in local government and will be following it no matter when the election is held, it could be held on Christmas every other year, you'll be voting. But the reality is that a lot of New Yorkers are not paying attention at all. And what the experts in this stuff told us is that when New Yorkers are planning to vote in the federal presidential election, thinking about voting, engaged in voting, that can actually have a beneficial effect in getting them engaged in what else is on the ballot. And that's been the experience in other parts of the country that have made this change. And so rather than distracting from local government, it can actually bring more eyeballs and more attention to local government.
Thanks, Alec. Going to what seems to be the last couple questions back on housing. So first, these are more comments, but I think if you can sort of respond to the general sentiment here. Got a couple comments about in those parts of the city that allow taller buildings, many residents don't want even taller buildings, 30% more. And then concerns about, this is a question, will there be consideration to the effect on transit traffic, school capacity, and available services? So general questions about how the city deals with all the various needs outside of housing and how those needs might be met or changed by these proposals.
Totally. So I'm going to again do reverse order there, Casey. So yes, everything on that fast track in the bottom 12 community districts is actually going to require the City Planning Commission to make an explicit finding that there's adequate transit and other infrastructure like sewer capacity to handle that kind of change, right? Because we know that there are real constraints all over the city that prevent really big changes. We also, in question 2, are amending the city's capital plan, which is the 10-year document which plots out the infrastructure investments it's going to make for the first time to reflect the city council's fair housing framework so that investments are made proactively and affirmatively across the city and not just in response to development proposals, which is really critical and one reason why so many advocates for comprehensive planning and more thoughtful planning have been excited about question 2. Now, as to the idea that some communities are concerned about a 30% bump, I have to tell you, as someone who served on my community board, that I kind of feel differently. When I was serving on my community board, what I saw was concern and shock over just how big and scary the stuff that was coming through public review today is. Because today, the only things we see are requests for double or triple what you can build today, because that's the only thing that our one-size-fits-all process allows to come down the pipe. But people seem to be a lot more open to the idea of organic and incremental small changes that fit within the existing look and feel of a neighborhood. And that's what that modest proposal is trying to unlock. And even more than that, what's really nice is that allows us, even for those small changes, to require mandatory inclusionary housing in medium and high density parts of the city, meaning that we're going to get not just a little bit more, but we're going to be able to deliver permanently affordable housing. And every community in the city, even medium and high density neighborhoods that have good jobs and transit and good schools, they need to be places that working families can live in too. So delivering permanently affordable housing is essential for those neighborhoods remaining a place where middle class and working class families can thrive.
Thanks, Alec. And I'm actually just going to ask you to repeat something you said. I'm guessing someone joined the Zoom a little bit late, but the question is the Charter Commission removing or omitting the power of community boards to make recommendations?
No, nowhere is the Charter Revision Commission removing the power of community boards to make recommendations. I'll say it one last time. Every single place where today community boards have the power to weigh in, they will continue to have the power to weigh in. And we are not shortening community board review period by a day anywhere, nowhere. We're not even shortening the notice period that community boards have. And so we're holding community board review harmless for an important reason, because we think local voices really matter in the development process.
Thanks, Alec. We are starting to get a couple repeat questions, so I'll just reiterate to folks that this is being recorded. It'll be posted online afterward. If you'd like to get in touch with us with any other questions, please email charterinfo@citycharter.nyc.gov. Got just a handful more, and then we'll close up shop for the evening here. But again, we do hope to answer any more questions that you think of after this evening. So back to questions on the appeals board. Again, this is question 4, the Affordable Housing Appeals Board, which Alec answered earlier, was that the appeals board will hold a public meeting open to various open meetings laws, but not a hearing. The follow-up question on that answer was, does it seem contradictory to remove public input at the last stop when the body could potentially reverse an already made decision?
Not from our perspective, because again, we're keeping the ULURP process whole up to that point. So you will have had a public hearing at the community board. You'll have had a public hearing at a borough president. You'll have had a public hearing at a city planning commission. You'll have had a public hearing at a city council. And the appeals board will hold a public meeting, but not a 5th additional public hearing. Now, what's critical here is that the appeals board can only restore an application to the version that was approved by the city planning commission, and only if those 2 out of 3 folks agree. So there already will have been multiple public hearings on the version that the city planning commission was looking at or approved. An additional public hearing at that stage would be lengthening the process, probably without adding additional new perspectives to the table.
Thanks, Alec. Moving back over to elections and question 6 regarding even year elections. We have 2 questions, but I'll give you one at a time. First, fairly straightforward. If this proposal is approved and then also the New York State Constitution is amended, will that mean that whoever is elected mayor in 2029 would only serve a 3-year term, and then after 2029, the next mayoral election would be in 2032?
It could, if that's when the state constitutional amendment goes into play. Now, there is a one-time transition from a 4-year term to a 3-year term, depending on when this stuff goes into effect. And how that will work will depend on when the state constitutional amendment goes into play. Now, you might be asking, how does this affect term limits? Is someone, a city council member or a mayor, only going to have 7 years? And the answer is, it actually depends. They could have 11 years rather than 7 years. Because, and now this is really getting in the weeds, folks, but today under the city charter, if someone serves a shortened term, that term doesn't count as a full term for purposes of term limits. Jumaane Williams, who I think is largely expected to be elected public advocate again, may serve as public advocate for 11 years because he was elected at a shortened term in a special election. So the same would be true for someone who's elected to a 4-year term but has that term shortened prematurely by a state constitutional amendment. That shortened 3-year term wouldn't count for the purposes of term limits. But if someone is elected only for a 3-year term, knowing it will be a 3-year term, that'll count as a full term for purposes of term limits. And if you're still confused, we laid this out on our website, nyc.gov/charter. In our final report, you can read all about how the term limits will be affected. and how implementation of a shift to even year elections would work. But I'll reinforce this. This is a change that many cities across the country have made and have seen very significant increases in local turnout as a result.
All right, 2 more questions, one more on elections, then one last housing one. Last one on elections is with regards to question 6. What considerations are being made for city primaries being ranked choice? And then the not said in the question, but the implication is that other elections that would be on the same ballot are not ranked choice.
So we looked at this, and it's not unprecedented for other places that have ranked choice elections to hold their election at the same time as elections without ranked choice. And we did not find any evidence that increases confusion or drop off among voters. Drop off being the phenomenon where, as the ballot gets longer, folks stop voting on things. We didn't see any evidence that was linked to a mixed system where some folks are ranked choice voting and some aren't. And I think it's encouraging that New Yorkers are doing a very good job of using their ranked choice votes. As you might have seen in the primary, there's a very, very high uptake of ranked choice voting, with the vast majority of voters using their multiple slots in multiple races, indicating that New Yorkers are doing a very good job of understanding this new system.
Thanks, Al. And so our last question, just to close out, is from someone who submitted this when they registered, presumably from Staten Island, who asks, how will the proposals affect the need for affordable senior housing on Staten Island?
Well, we hope it will help encourage affordable senior housing on Staten Island. You know, some parts of Staten Island are parts of the city where there's been very, very little affordable housing production in recent years. I have a lot of family on Staten Island. I grew up in Brooklyn, but a lot of family on Staten Island. I can tell you it's very hard to age in place on Staten Island. My grandfather lived in a side garden apartment that was far too small on his Social Security check. And it was a pretty uncomfortable situation. And it was pretty hard to see him like that in the last years of his life. And I wish that someone had had a affordable senior apartment where he could have lived with a little bit more dignity. And a political process that is preventing the kind of delivery of that housing today is one of the things that we're trying to address through these proposals. And so I'm hopeful that this would open up new opportunities for Staten Island seniors to age in place, but also for their grandchildren to stay close by, because we know so many young people on Staten Island are moving to New Jersey, God forbid, because that's what they can afford. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alec, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Great to see so many folks taking an interest in these ballot proposals. As you all probably know, early voting is going on right now. You can go to the polls and vote early every day until Sunday the 2nd. Then we take a little break, and then Election Day is on Tuesday the 4th. When you do, don't forget to flip your ballots over, and the questions that we just discussed will be on the back there. If you have any other questions, please get in touch at charterinfo@citycharter.nyc.gov, or just find out more at charter.nyc. So with that, thank you all very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.